The doctor called it a fortress of solitude. He meant it as a compliment to the architect. I heard it as a diagnosis. My fortress was a house of glass and steel, cantilevered over a sharp drop of granite and pine. From inside, the world was a pristine, silent panorama. The mountains didn't judge. The sky didn't ask questions. They just were. It was the only kind of company I could tolerate. My life, before the collapse, had been a skyscraper of meticulously stacked obligations. Each meeting, each decision, each flight was a pane of glass added to the tower, until the whole structure became impossibly tall, impossibly fragile. The day it shattered, I didn't even hear the sound. I just found myself on the cold marble floor of my office, the world a smear of color and the taste of blood in my mouth. Burnout, they called it. A soft word for a hard stop. The board, in its infinite and terrified wisdom, mandated a 6-month sabbatical, effective immediately. They couched it in the language of concern, but I knew what it was. Quarantine. I was a contagion of failure, and they were sealing me away in my own beautiful, expensive containment unit. Part of the seal was him, Liam, the private chef. His arrival was as quiet and unobtrusive as the fall of dusk outside my vast windows. He didn't knock so much as materialize at the front door, 2 duffel bags and a long, leather-bound roll of knives, his only luggage. He was tall, built with a farmer's solidity that seemed out of place in my minimalist world. His movements were economical, each one with a clear and defined purpose. There was no wasted energy in him. He was the antithesis of the frantic, buzzing mess I had become. The agency had sent a portfolio. Michelin-starred kitchens. Glowing testimonials from people whose names carried weight. But the file hadn't captured the stillness of him. It hadn't described the way his gaze seemed to absorb light, or the quiet set of his jaw. Our first conversation was an exchange of terms. A contract. 3 meals a day, I said, my voice sounding rusty in the echoing space of the main living area. The nutritionist's plan is on the counter. My schedule is on the tablet. I take my meals in the study. He nodded, his eyes scanning the space, not with curiosity, but with a kind of professional assessment. He was measuring distances, mapping workflows. And allergies? The file is comprehensive. Another nod. He unrolled his knives on the vast, sterile island of my kitchen, and the steel gleamed under the track lighting. Each blade was a weapon, and he handled them with a surgeon's reverence. The kitchen had been a showpiece, a collection of expensive, untouched appliances. In his presence, it became a workspace. It became his. This was the lie we agreed to live. He was a service provider. I was the client. He would cook. I would eat. The house was large enough that we could exist in separate orbits. 2 celestial bodies held in a loose, predictable pattern by the gravity of my recovery. A professional line, drawn in the sand, invisible, but absolute. I retreated to my study, the designated command center of my convalescence. I had books I was supposed to read, meditation apps I was supposed to use. Instead, I watched the market data stream across a muted monitor, a ghost limb twitching with the memory of phantom power. The first meal arrived precisely at 1 o'clock. A tray left on the small table outside my study door. He knocked once, a soft rap of knuckles on wood, and was gone before I could even register the sound. It was seared salmon with wilted greens and quinoa. Each component was perfect. It was food as medicine, devoid of pleasure, designed for function. I ate it without tasting it, my focus on the silent, flickering numbers on the screen. This was how it would be. Contained. Controlled. Safe. I built my days around this new, rigid structure. Wake, meditate, stare at the wall. Read, scan pages. Eat, work, pretend to work, sleep. Liam was a ghost in this routine. I would hear the distant, rhythmic chop of a knife, the soft hiss of a pan. I would smell garlic and rosemary, scents that felt alien and aggressively alive in my sterile environment. He was a constant, low-level hum in the background of my silence. He never intruded. He was a master of presence through absence. The trays appeared. The kitchen was left immaculate, the stainless steel gleaming. No trace of him left behind, except for the lingering aroma of food. He would disappear into his own wing of the house, a space I never ventured into. For the first week, I barely saw him. A glimpse of his back as he unloaded groceries from a delivery truck. A shadow moving past a distant window. It was perfect. He was an abstraction, a function, a necessary part of the recovery apparatus. But the house wasn't built for secrets. It was built for light. The walls were glass, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop myself from watching. The storm arrived without warning, a bruised purple stain spreading across the afternoon sky. It came in fast, swallowing the mountains and erasing the horizon. The first crack of thunder was a physical blow, shaking the huge panes of glass in their steel frames. The lights flickered, once, twice, and then died. The world went dark and silent. The sudden absence of the house's hum, the refrigerator, the climate control, the server rack in the basement, was more deafening than the storm itself. I was plunged into a primal darkness, the only light a faint, bruised glow from the sky beyond the windows. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A switch had been flipped. My meticulously constructed environment, the one thing I could control, had been taken from me. The fortress was breached. Breathe. The doctor's voice, a calm echo in the chaos of my thoughts. Just breathe. I fumbled for my phone, its screen a blinding rectangle of light. No signal. Of course. The generator was supposed to kick in automatically. It hadn't. Another failure. Another system breaking down around me. Panic, cold and slick, began to climb my throat. Then, a sound. The soft scrape of a shoe on the concrete floor, coming from the direction of the kitchen. A beam of light cut through the darkness, steady and calm. It panned across the floor and then rose, finding my face. I flinched, raising a hand to shield my eyes. Theodore? Liam's voice. It wasn't loud, but it filled the cavernous space. It was solid, grounded. The generator failed to engage, I said. My own voice was thin, strained. I hated the sound of it. I hated the weakness it betrayed. I know, he said. The beam of his flashlight lowered, pointing at the floor between us, a small pool of neutral territory. The breaker for the auto start must have tripped. It's in the utility room in the basement. I'll go check. He started to turn, and an irrational spike of fear shot through me. The idea of being left alone in the vast, echoing darkness was suddenly unbearable. Wait! The word escaped before I could stop it. He stopped. The beam of light held steady on the floor. He didn't turn around, but I could feel his attention, his stillness. I'll come with you, I said, forcing a tone of authority I didn't feel. I should know where the main breaker is anyway. It was a lie. I had no idea. I had people for that. I always had people for things like that. He was silent for a moment. Then a simple, okay. He led the way, his flashlight a reassuring beacon. I followed the dark shape of his back, my eyes fixed on the steady rhythm of his stride. He moved with a confidence that felt like a physical shield. The sound of our footsteps and the roar of the storm outside were the only things in the world. The basement was cold, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and ozone. He found the breaker box easily, playing the light over the panel of switches. His fingers, long and capable, traced the labels. Here it is. He flipped a switch. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. It's not the breaker. The whole unit might have flooded. The rain has been biblical. I felt the panic begin to bubble up again, hot and acidic. No power. No connection to the outside world. Trapped. There's a fireplace in the main living area, he said, his voice cutting through my spiraling thoughts. He turned the flashlight back towards me, and for a second, it caught his eyes. There was no alarm in them, only assessment, problem, solution. And I have a gas camp stove in my gear. We'll have coffee in the morning. For tonight, I'll build a fire. He was so calm. It was infuriating. It was also the only thing keeping me from coming apart at the seams. He didn't wait for my approval. He simply started back up the stairs, and I followed, a satellite caught in his gravitational pull. In the living room, he worked with the same quiet efficiency he applied to everything. He retrieved a canvas log carrier from a utility closet I didn't even know existed. He laid the fire with an expert hand, kindling, smaller logs, larger ones, a precise architecture of combustion. A single strike of a match, and a small, hungry flame flickered to life. He did it all without speaking, his movements fluid and certain in the growing firelight. I just stood there, useless, a spectator in my own home. My armor of control, of delegation, of power was gone. I was just a man in a dark room, scared of the storm. The fire caught, and a warm golden light pushed back the oppressive darkness. The room transformed. The cold glass walls seemed to recede, and the space around the hearth became an intimate circle of light and warmth. The scent of pine and wood smoke filled the air. Liam stood up, brushing his hands on his jeans. He looked at the fire, then at me. Better? He asked. It was a simple question. A professional courtesy. But in the charged silence, it felt like more. It felt like he could see right through the facade I presented to the world. He could see the frayed edges, the panic I was trying so hard to contain. I just nodded, unable to speak. He retrieved 2 thick wool blankets from a chest by the window. He handed one to me. The wool was rough, substantial in my hands. Our fingers brushed as I took it. A jolt, like static electricity, sharp and unexpected. I pulled my hand back as if burned. My heart gave a painful lurch. It was nothing. An accident. A trick of the frayed nerves and the strange, primal atmosphere. He didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he gave no sign. He just wrapped his own blanket around his shoulders and settled onto the floor on one side of the hearth, his back against the cool stone. He left the entire sprawling sofa for me. I hesitated, then sat on the far end of the couch, a chasm of leather between us. I wrapped the blanket around myself. It smelled faintly of cedar and him. The professional line had not just been crossed. It had been erased by the darkness. We were no longer client and employee. We were 2 people in a glass house, waiting out a storm. The lie was suspended, and in its place a new and terrifying reality began to take shape, illuminated by the flickering firelight. The power did not return that night, or the next day. The storm passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and eerily silent. A fallen tree had taken out the power line halfway down the mountain. The utility company gave a vague estimate of 2 to 3 days, maybe more. So the new routine established itself. Our orbits had collapsed into a single shared space, the warm circle of the fireplace. During the day, a pale, watery sunlight filled the house, but it was a deceptive light, offering no warmth. We stayed close to the hearth. At night, the fire was our only defense against the profound, ink-black darkness of the mountains. Liam was resourceful. He cooked on the small camp stove, simple, hearty meals that filled the house with the rich smells of simmering stew and strong, percolated coffee. He showed me how to work the hand-crank radio to get weather updates. He seemed to have a contingency plan for everything. He was a self-contained ecosystem of competence. I, on the other hand, was adrift. My laptop was dead. My phone was a useless brick. The streams of data that had defined my existence were gone. All my tools of control were inert. All I had was time. Endless, unstructured, terrifying time. And him. My hyper-analytical mind, deprived of its usual diet of stock prices and market projections, turned its full, obsessive attention onto Liam. I started to notice things, the way he moved, a quiet economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. He never fumbled, never hesitated. Whether he was splitting kindling with a small axe or finely dicing an onion, his hands were steady and sure, the sound of his breathing. In the deep silence of the powerless house, it became a part of the soundscape, a slow, steady rhythm that I found myself unconsciously matching. When he slept on his side of the hearth, a bundled shape in a wool blanket, the sound of his breathing was a grounding presence in the dark. It told me I wasn't alone. His scent. It wasn't cologne. It was something more fundamental. Wood smoke from the fire. The sharp, clean smell of pine from the wood he brought in. The faint, lingering aroma of spices. Cardamom, cumin. Something else I couldn't name. And underneath it all, a clean, warm scent that was just him. It was maddening. It was everywhere. I tried to maintain the pretense of our old arrangement. I would retreat to my cold study with a book, wrapping the blanket tightly around myself. But the silence and the chill would eventually drive me back to the gravitational pull of the fire. Back to him. He didn't push. He never initiated conversation beyond the necessities. Coffee's ready. Dinner in 10. But his presence was a constant, unspoken question. One afternoon, I was sitting on the couch, staring into the flames, my mind a blank, buzzing void. He was on the floor, sharpening one of his knives on a whetstone. The rhythmic shing, shing, shing of steel on stone was the only sound. You're thinking too loud. His voice startled me. He hadn't looked up from his work. His focus was entirely on the blade, the angle, the pressure. I wasn't thinking anything, I lied. That's when it's the loudest, he said, still not looking up. He wiped the blade clean with an oiled cloth. The steel shone in the firelight. The engine is running, but you're not in gear. It's bad for the transmission. The metaphor was so unexpected, so precise, that it left me speechless. He had just described the exact state of my mind for the past year. A frantic, pointless spinning. He finally looked up at me. His eyes, in the warm light, were the color of dark honey. They weren't pitying. They were seeing. It was a look of such direct, unvarnished perception that I felt stripped bare, my carefully constructed armor of stoicism and control turning to smoke. My breath caught in my chest. This gaze. It was a physical thing. It held me pinned. It was the first time in years I felt like someone was looking at me, Theodore, and not the title on my business card or the number in my bank account. He saw the fraying seams, the cracked foundation, and he wasn't looking away. I was the one who broke the contact. My eyes dropping back to the fire, my heart hammering a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. What is this? The held gaze. That's what it was. A moment that redrew the map between us. The professional line wasn't just gone. The ground it had been drawn on had ceased to exist. The accidental touches became more frequent, and each one was a fresh torment. He would pass me a mug of coffee, his fingers brushing mine. The ceramic was hot, but the brief contact with his skin was hotter. A brand that lingered long after he pulled away. I would spend the next hour replaying the tiny moment, analyzing the texture of his calloused fingertips, the fleeting pressure. We reached for the same log at the same time, our hands meeting over the rough bark, a clumsy, awkward moment. My immediate reaction was to recoil, to apologize, to retreat into formality. "Sorry," I muttered, pulling my hand back. "It's just a log, Theodore," he said, his voice laced with a faint, dry irony. He picked it up and placed it on the fire. Sparks flew up, dancing like fireflies in the chimney. He was calling me Theodore now, not Mr. Harrison. The shift was subtle, but it felt seismic. The pinnacle of this new, agonizing awareness came on the third evening. Dinner was a spicy lentil stew he'd made in a cast-iron pot over the fire. It was rich and complex, the heat of it blooming slowly on the tongue. It was the first thing I had actually tasted in months. We ate in our usual spots, me on the couch, him on the floor. The silence between us thick with the crackle of the fire and the clink of spoons against ceramic bowls. I was so focused on the explosion of flavor in my mouth that I was careless. He was watching me again. I could feel it. I looked up, and his gaze was steady. His own spoon paused halfway to his mouth. There was an unreadable expression on his face, a slight furrow in his brow. "What?" I asked, my voice defensive. He didn't answer. Instead, he put his bowl down and moved. He unfolded himself from the floor and knelt in front of me before I could process what was happening. The space between us vanished. He was so close. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a palpable wave that had nothing to do with the fire. I could smell the wood smoke on his clothes and the faint, clean scent of his skin. My entire nervous system went into overdrive. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming, "Too close. This is wrong. Move." But I was frozen. A block of ice. "You have," he said, his voice a low murmur. He lifted his hand and I flinched. He paused, his fingers hovering in the air between us. A question. A request for permission. I gave a short, jerky nod, my throat too tight to speak. His thumb, calloused and warm, came to rest at the corner of my mouth. It moved with an impossible gentleness, wiping away a stray fleck of spice. The touch was electric, a lightning strike that arced through every nerve ending in my body, straight down to my core. My breath hitched. My heart stopped. His eyes were locked on mine. The world narrowed to the few inches between our faces. The fire, the house, the mountains, they all disappeared. There was only the intense focus in his gaze and the searing heat of his thumb against my skin. He didn't pull away immediately. His thumb rested there for a beat too long, the pressure firm, grounding. His expression shifted. The professional calm was gone, replaced by something deeper, something unguarded. It was a look of intense, quiet concentration, as if he were memorizing the lines of my face. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't pity. This wasn't a professional attending to a messy client. This was something else entirely. I thought the private chef only pitied me, the broken CEO, the man who couldn't even eat without making a mess. But the way he cleaned the spice off my lip, the deliberate, lingering intimacy of the gesture, was proof. It was proof he was waiting. He was watching me dismantle myself, piece by piece, and he was waiting for me to finally break. He finally pulled his hand away, and the air rushed back into my lungs with a gasp. He stood up and returned to his spot by the fire as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. The last of my fortress walls had just been breached, and I had no idea how to build them back up again. The power came back on the 5th day. It returned with a sudden, jarring burst of life. The lights flickered on, humming with fluorescent efficiency. The refrigerator kicked in with a low groan. The digital clocks on the appliances blinked 12 o'clock in unison. The spell was broken. The warm, intimate circle of firelight was instantly rendered obsolete, replaced by the cold, even glow of modern technology. The silence we had grown accustomed to was shattered by the ambient hum of the house. Liam and I were standing in the kitchen. He was refilling the water filter. I was just standing there. When the lights came on, we both froze, blinking like nocturnal creatures caught in a sudden headlight. We looked at each other across the vast marble island. In the harsh, clinical light of the kitchen, the easy proximity we had shared by the fire felt impossible. A dream from another lifetime. The space between us was no longer a few feet of cozy air. It was a carefully measured distance, a professional chasm. "Well," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud, "I suppose things can get back to normal." Normal. What a ridiculous, empty word. What was normal anymore? The rigid, sterile isolation I had cultivated before the storm? The silent trays outside my door? Going back to that felt like trying to force myself into a suit that was 2 sizes too small. It felt like a suffocation. Liam just nodded, his expression unreadable again. He turned his attention back to the water filter, his movements precise, contained. The mask of the quiet professional was back in place. The man who had knelt before me, whose thumb had seared my skin, was gone. I felt a surge of something sharp and painful. Disappointment? Panic? I fled. I retreated to my study, closing the door firmly behind me. I powered up my laptop, my phone. The screens came to life, flooding my senses with emails, market alerts, news updates. The world I had been cut off from came rushing back in, a digital tsunami. This was my armor, my fortress. I wrapped myself in the familiar comfort of data and deadlines. I answered emails with brisk efficiency. I made a few calls, my voice crisp and authoritative. I was rebuilding my walls, brick by digital brick. But it was a facade. My focus kept drifting. My eyes would lose their place on the screen, my mind replaying the feeling of his thumb against my lip. I could still smell the wood smoke in the air, a ghost of the intimacy we had shared. The hum of the house felt oppressive now, not comforting. Dinner that night was a return to the old protocol. A single soft knock on my study door. I waited a full minute before opening it. The tray was on the table. He was gone. It was a perfectly composed dish of pan-seared scallops with an asparagus puree. It was elegant. It was professional. It tasted like ashes. I couldn't eat. I pushed the plate away, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The silence from the other side of the door was different now. It wasn't the peaceful, companionable silence of the fireside. It was a heavy, pressurized silence, filled with unspoken things. The dynamic had shifted, but not in the way I expected. I was the one observing now, but it was no longer from a place of detached analysis. It was from a place of desperate, yearning confusion. I found myself watching him on the security monitors I could access from my tablet. A live feed of the kitchen, the living room. It felt like a violation, a new kind of boundary crossing, but I couldn't stop. I watched him clean the kitchen, his movements as fluid and efficient as ever. But I saw things I hadn't seen before. I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he would sometimes pause, resting his hands on the edge of the sink, and stare out the massive window into the darkness, his reflection a pale ghost on the glass. He looked lonely. The thought was a revelation. I had always seen him as so self-contained, so complete, an anchor of calm in my chaotic world. It had never occurred to me that he might have his own storms, his own silences to endure. One night, a few days after the power had returned, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too cold. I was prowling the hallways like a caged animal, the polished concrete cool beneath my bare feet. As I passed the entrance to the wing where he slept, I heard a sound, a voice. His voice. It was low, strained. I stopped, pressing my ear against the cool wood of the door, my heart pounding with a guilt that was quickly overshadowed by a desperate need to know. "I can't," he was saying. "No, you don't understand. It's not about the money." A pause. I could hear the faint, tinny squawk of another person on the phone, but couldn't make out the words. "Because I can't leave him," Liam said, and his voice was raw, stripped of all its professional calm. It was the sound of utter exhaustion. "No, not like that. He's fragile. He needs—" His voice broke. "Just tell her I'll send the money when I can. Tell her I'm sorry." The line went dead. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood frozen outside his door, my hand pressed over my mouth. "He can't leave him. He's fragile." He was talking about me. And he wasn't talking to my corporate handlers. The conversation was personal, painful. He was sacrificing something for me. He was staying here, in this glass cage, because he thought I needed him. The carefully constructed narrative I had built around him, the stoic, unshakable professional, shattered. He wasn't an anchor. He was a man with his own life, his own burdens, his own heartaches. And he was carrying them in silence in the next room, while I wallowed in my own self-pity. The facade had cracked, but it wasn't mine. It was his. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The endless, looping analysis of my own feelings, my own fears, ceased. For the first time, my focus was entirely external. It was on him. The protector instinct. It rose up in me, fierce and unfamiliar. The desire to take care of him, to shield him from whatever was causing that pain in his voice, was a physical force. It was stronger than my fear, stronger than my anxiety, stronger than the rules that had governed my entire adult life. My role as the client, the patient, the broken man being cared for, evaporated. I was no longer the one who needed saving. I knocked on his door. It wasn't a soft, professional rap. It was a firm, solid knock. A statement. The door opened a few seconds later. Liam stood there, silhouetted by the dim light of his room. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair was messy. His face was pale, his eyes wide with surprise. He looked unguarded. He looked vulnerable. "Theodore?" I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time. I saw the dark circles under his eyes, the faint lines of stress around his mouth. I saw the man from the phone call, the one carrying a weight I couldn't comprehend. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough. The question was so absurd, so typical of him. To be in the midst of his own crisis and still be focused on my well-being. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between us with the weight of a stone. The question is, are you? His composure flickered. A storm of emotions passed through his eyes. Surprise, confusion, a flash of fear, and then a deep, bone-weary resignation. He leaned his forehead against the doorframe, closing his eyes. "You heard," he whispered. It wasn't a question. "I heard," I confirmed. He didn't move. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, his defenses finally completely down. He looked like a fortress that had just been surrendered. The roles had reversed. I was no longer the patient. He was no longer the caregiver. We were just two men, standing in a quiet hallway, the truth exposed between us. And I knew, with a certainty that cut through all my internal noise, that I would not let him face this alone. I had spent my life building walls to keep people out. For the first time, I wanted to build one to keep someone safe. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of his confession and my discovery. He didn't move from the doorway, his head still resting against the frame, a posture of complete surrender. My own internal monologue, the frantic hamster wheel of anxiety and overanalysis, had gone blessedly quiet. There was only one imperative, one clear, simple thought. Close the distance. But the old habits, the old fears, died hard. My feet felt rooted to the floor. The hallway between us seemed to stretch for miles. Reaching out, offering comfort, was a language I didn't speak. My native tongue was withdrawal, observation, distance. Liam finally pushed himself off the doorframe, his movements slow, heavy with exhaustion. He looked at me, his eyes shadowed with a weary sort of shame. "You shouldn't have heard that," he said, his voice low. "It's unprofessional. I apologize." He was trying to rebuild the wall, to retreat back to the safety of our initial contract. "Stop," I said. The word was sharper than I intended. It made him flinch. I took a breath, forcing myself to soften my tone. "Stop hiding behind that word. Professionalism has nothing to do with this." He just stared at me, his expression lost. This was the moment, the final threshold. I could let him close the door, let us both retreat to our separate corners and pretend this night never happened. We could go back to the sterile trays, the silent observation, the suffocating lie. Or I could choose. I could choose to tear down the last remaining wall of my own fortress. I took a step forward, then another. I stopped when I was standing directly in front of him, so close I could see the faint tremor in his hands. "Who was that, Liam?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, looking down at the floor. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," I insisted. I reached out, my own hand trembling, and gently touched his arm. His muscles were coiled tight, a bundle of tension. The contact was electric, just like before, but this time I didn't pull away. I held on. "Talk to me." He looked up at me then, and his eyes were glistening. The sight of his unshed tears was a punch to the gut. This man, this pillar of quiet strength, was breaking right in front of me. "It's my sister," he said, his voice cracking. "Her son, he's sick. The treatments are expensive. I've been sending everything I have, but it's not enough. They want to stop if we can't make the next payment." The story tumbled out of him in a raw, broken whisper. The high-paying jobs, the Michelin kitchens, it was all for them. The pressure he was under was immense, a crushing weight he had been carrying in complete silence. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my thumb stroking his arm, trying to offer some small, inadequate comfort. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "And say what? Excuse me, Mr. Harrison, my personal life is a train wreck. Can I have an advance? You hired me to solve a problem for you, not to be one." He thinks he's a problem. The thought was unbearable. "You are not a problem," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. Liam, you're the only thing in this whole God-forsaken house that makes any sense. His breath hitched. His gaze searched mine, looking for the lie, the pity. He found none. This was the turning point. The unspoken tension was now a raw, gaping wound between us. He had challenged my perception of him, and now I had to challenge his perception of me. He saw me as a fragile client, a responsibility. I had to make him see me as something else. I am not fragile, I said, my voice low and fierce. I took my hand from his arm and cupped his jaw, my fingers resting against the rough stubble on his cheek. His skin was warm. He leaned into my touch, a small, almost imperceptible movement. But it was everything. It was permission. I am not your patient, and you are not just my chef. His eyes fluttered shut. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down his cheek. I wiped it away with my thumb, the same thumb that had wiped away the spice. The gesture felt sacred now. What if I don't want to go back? I whispered, the words a direct challenge to the lie we had been living. What if I don't want the trays outside the door? What if I don't want the silence? He opened his eyes. They were dark, deep, and filled with a terrifying, beautiful vulnerability. What do you want, Theodore? He breathed. It was the final question. The one that required a conscious choice. Abandon the rules. Surrender the control. Cross the threshold. My heart was a thunderous roar in my ears. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But for the first time, the desire for connection was stronger. The need to keep this man from breaking was stronger. I need you closer, I confessed. The words were a plea, stripped of all artifice. It was the truest thing I had said in a decade. He didn't answer with words. He closed the small gap between us. His hands came up to grip my shirt, his knuckles pressing into my chest, holding on like a drowning man. I wrapped my arms around his back, pulling him tight against me. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. A crash. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, and a shudder racked his entire body. I felt the dampness of his tears against my skin. I held him tighter, my hand moving to the back of his head, my fingers tangling in his hair. I was holding him together. I was holding myself together. This was the surrender. It was the collapse of every wall I had ever built. The armor I had worn for years melted away in the heat of this embrace. All the analysis, all the fear, all the carefully maintained distance, it was all meaningless noise in the face of this one, profound, grounding truth. His breathing was ragged against my neck. Mine was just as unsteady. Our heartbeats hammered against each other, a frantic, syncopated rhythm. The lie of our arrangement, the professional premise that had brought us together, was finally, irrevocably dismantled. He wasn't here to fix my diet. I wasn't here to recover from burnout. We were here to find each other in the wreckage. I'll handle it. I whispered into his hair, the words a vow. Your sister, the money. I'll handle it. He shook his head against my shoulder, a weak protest. Let me, I insisted, my voice cracking. Liam, let me do this. Let me take care of you. He pulled back just enough to look at me. His face was a mess of tears and relief, and a raw, unguarded hope that stole the air from my lungs. His eyes searched mine, and whatever he found there seemed to be enough. He gave a slow, deep nod. The relief that flooded me was so intense, it made my knees weak. I had spent my life taking charge, making decisions worth billions of dollars. But this one small act of giving, of caring for this one man, felt like the most important transaction of my life. He didn't pull away. He stayed in my arms, his hands still gripping my shirt. The desperation in his hold had softened into something else, a simple, profound need to be held. I guided him back into his room, my arm securely around his waist. The room was as sparse and functional as the man himself. A neatly made bed, a single book on the nightstand. I sat him down on the edge of the bed and knelt in front of him, my hands resting on his knees. The position was a mirror of the moment by the fire, but the roles were completely reversed. Now I was the one offering comfort. "Breathe," I said softly. It was the command he had silently given me for weeks, with his calm presence, with his steady rhythm. Now I was giving it back to him. Just breathe. With me. I took a slow, deep breath, and after a moment, he mirrored me. We stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the floor of his simple room, just breathing together in the quiet dark. The climactic embrace wasn't about passion or lust. It was about need. It was about the desperate human craving to be held, to be seen, to be told that you don't have to carry the weight of the world by yourself. Later, I don't know how much later, he finally stirred. He started, his voice raspy, but he didn't seem to know how to finish the sentence. Should what? Go back to his side of the house? Pretend this never happened? "Stay," I said. It was a command, but it felt like a plea. I stood up, pulling him gently to his feet. I led him not to the door, but to the bed. I pulled back the covers and guided him to lie down. He went without protest, his body pliant with exhaustion and relief. I hesitated for only a second before I was sliding in beside him on top of the covers. I didn't take off my clothes. This wasn't about that. It was about proximity. It was about not leaving him alone. I stretched out on my back, and he immediately turned onto his side, curling towards my warmth. He rested his head on my shoulder, his arm draped across my chest. His body was a solid, grounding weight against mine. The heat from him soaked through my shirt, a comforting, living warmth. I could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing against my ribs. His scent, wood smoke and spices, and that clean, essential scent of him filled my senses. For years, my bed had been a cold, empty expanse, a place for restless, anxious sleep. Tonight, it was an anchor, a sanctuary. I lay awake for hours, staring up at the dark ceiling, my arm wrapped around him, holding him close. The frantic engine in my mind was finally, blessedly, still. There were no projections, no analyses, no spiraling what-ifs. There was only the solid weight of him, the sound of his breathing, and the quiet, revolutionary feeling of not being alone. The fortress had fallen. The walls were rubble. And in the ruins, something new and fragile and fiercely alive was beginning to grow. I woke to the pale gray light of dawn filtering into the room. For a moment, I was disoriented. The ceiling was unfamiliar. Then I felt the weight against my side, the warmth, and it all came rushing back. Liam was still asleep. His face relaxed and peaceful in a way I had never seen it before. The lines of stress were gone. He looked younger. In sleep, his own armor was down, and the vulnerability there was so profound it made my chest ache. I watched him breathe. The simple, miraculous rise and fall of his chest. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Our new reality began not with a conversation, but with a shared stillness. When he eventually woke, he didn't startle. His eyes opened slowly, and he looked at me. There was no awkwardness, no panicked retreat. Just a quiet, sleepy recognition. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied. He didn't move away. I didn't release him. We just lay there for a long time, watching the morning light fill the room. The silence was no longer pressurized or heavy with unspoken things. It was comfortable, easy. a soft blanket covering us both. Eventually, the need for coffee became undeniable. We moved to the kitchen together. Our movements were a clumsy, unpracticed dance. We bumped into each other, reaching for mugs. Our hands brushed as he passed me the sugar. Each touch was still a small jolt, but the fear was gone. It was replaced by a quiet thrill, a sense of discovery. He made the coffee. I made the toast. It felt domestic. It felt revolutionary. We sat at the kitchen island, a space we had only ever occupied separately. The morning sun streamed through the huge glass walls, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "About last night," I started, needing to give voice to the change, to solidify it. He looked up from his mug, his gaze steady. "Thank you, Theodore." It was so simple. 2 words. But they held the weight of his confession, of his relief, of his trust. "I meant what I said," I told him, my voice firm. "I'm making a call this morning. It will be taken care of. All of it." He opened his mouth to protest, the instinct to refuse help so deeply ingrained in him. "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. "This is not charity, it's logistics. Let me handle the logistics." I was translating the emotion into a language we both understood. A problem, a solution. He searched my face for a long moment, then gave a single, slow nod. Acceptance. That was the unspoken pact. I would handle the external pressures, the financial weights that were crushing him. I would use the power and resources I had, not as a tool of control, but as a shield for him. And he would stay. He would let me in. He would be the calm center to my frantic mind, the grounding force in my untethered world. We would figure out the rest of it, the what this is, together. It wasn't defined. It didn't need a label. It just was. The days that followed were quiet. The tension was gone, replaced by a gentle, exploratory current. We talked. Really talked. Not about markets or meal plans, but about his sister's kid who loved dinosaurs, about the small town in Vermont where he grew up, about the book I was trying and failing to read. We ate all our meals together at the kitchen island. He taught me the difference between a chiffonade and a julienne. I showed him how to read a corporate balance sheet, explaining the stories hidden in the numbers. We were learning each other's languages. One afternoon, we were standing by the glass wall, looking out at the mountains. The view that had once been a symbol of my isolation now felt like a shared backdrop, a witness to our new beginning. "I used to think strength was about building walls," I said, more to myself than to him. "The higher, the better. Impermeable." He was quiet for a moment, standing beside me, our shoulders almost touching. I could feel the warmth of him, a constant, reassuring presence. "Walls don't keep you safe," he said, his voice soft. "They just keep you alone." He was right. My fortress hadn't been a symbol of my power. It had been the architecture of my fear. My solitude wasn't a choice. It was a symptom. The real strength, the terrifying, exhilarating, life-altering strength, wasn't in the building of the wall. It was in the surrender. It was in the moment you finally let someone in, not to fix you, but to simply stand with you in the ruins. It was in the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of letting yourself be truly, completely seen. It was in a hand reaching out in the dark, and another hand taking it.